They half ran under Dora's pitiless urging to the small, squat seismology building. Once inside, they went down below the inhabited levels. The seismograph, fixed to bedrock and removed from the vibration of the city levels, was wired to a set of pressure transducers located within the thickness of the dome. Dora said, "There was a group of meteorologists upperside this afternoon. Can you detect their footsteps? Are there footsteps now?" Benastra gave the computer its necessary instructions. Pronounced hiccups staggered across the screen. Several sets of footsteps. Then, moving forward at 15-minute intervals, the computer detected the footsteps of one person. They had approached the meteorological instruments upperside, then stopped 20 or 25 minutes ago. "There's a man up there," said Doris, "and while you and I have been arguing down here, he's collapsed and is going to freeze and die. Call meteorology at once and get me Jenner Legan. Life or death, I tell you." It took no more than 3 minutes to get Legan's hologram on the message platform. Doris told him what they had found on the seismograph and insisted that he take her upperside immediately. "If anything has happened to Harry because you delay 1 minute, I'll see to it that you are hauled in for negligence and that you lose all status. And if he's dead, of course, that's manslaughter." Jenner reddened. "I'll come, but I'll have no mercy on you, young woman, if your student turns out to have been safe within the dome these past 3 hours." The three went up the elevator in silence. Doors carried a thermal blanket and 2 photonic founts. When they reached upperside, a cold wind rushed at them. None was adequately dressed. Doors lifted her arms, a photonic fount circling each wrist. "He could be anywhere," she said. The founts blazed into light, spraying in every direction. Snowflakes glittered like a vast mob of fireflies, making it even more difficult to see. Doris began to walk, swinging her arms, playing the light over as large a field as she could, straining her eyes for a dark blotch against the snow. As it happened, it was Benastra who said, "What's that?" and pointed. They found him, huddled and wet, about 10 meters from the door, 5 from the nearest meteorological device. Doris felt for his heartbeat, and Selden stirred and whimpered. "Give me the blanket, Dr. Benastra," said Doris. She spread it out on the snow. "Lift him onto it carefully, and I'll wrap him. Once we have him in my room, Dr. Legan, get a physician at once. If Dr. Selden comes through this without harm, I won't say anything, but only if he does." The physician who treated Selden was delighted. He had never seen a case of exposure. Doris thought later, as Harry was recovering without particular injury, that it was perhaps because he was an outworlder that he had survived so well. Dark, cold, even snow were not strange to him. Turning her mind away from these thoughts, she pulled up a chair near to Harry's bed and settled down to wait. On the second morning, Selden stirred awake and looked up at Doris, who sat at his bedside viewing a book film and taking notes. "Every time I wake up, you're here," Selden said. "I have a confession to make. I thought perhaps you were part of a conspiracy to maneuver me upperside, where I'd be outside university jurisdiction and subject to being picked up by Imperial forces." "But upperside isn't outside university jurisdiction," said Doris. "Anyway, it was my job to protect you. I can't stop blaming myself for your getting lost. From now on, I'm staying with you day and night." "But I didn't get lost," said Selden. "I told you I suspected a conspiracy, and I had cause to do so." He told Doris what had happened in full detail. "A jet down? Are you sure?" asked Doris. "It could not have been the Imperial forces searching for you. They could not have arrested you upperside without creating the same ferocious rumpus they would if they tried to arrest you on campus." She frowned. "Hammond will be very angry with me for not staying with you." "Then let's not tell him," said Selden. "It ended well." "We must tell him," said Doris. "This may not be the end." That evening, Jenner Legan came to visit. It was after dinner when Doris veered the conversation toward the hovering jet-down that had frightened Harry. Legan did not find the incident peculiar. A number of meteorological stations on Trantor possessed jet-downs for the direct study of clouds in the upper atmosphere, he said. To which station did this particular jet-down belong? Asked Dors. Legan shook his head. Dr. Venable, how can you possibly expect me to tell? It might be any station with jet-downs. Hestalonia, Y, Ziggurat, North Damiano. On a day's notice, any one of those vessels can reach us handily from any place on the planet. After Legan had gone, Dors sat down and thought. How much of what Legan had said was true, and what might possibly exist under the cover of his words? She did not know. When Selden woke, he found a new face looking at him solemnly. For a moment he frowned owlishly, and then he said, "Hammond?" Hammond smiled, very slightly. "As you see, I'm here, but—" and he glanced at Dors, who stood to one side. "It was not very easy for me to come here." Harry told Hammond about the jet-down incident. "You're a very persuasive person," he said. "After listening to you, I was ready to fear that Ito de Merzel was lurking in every shadow." "Sometimes I think he might be," Hammond said. "Nonetheless, your conviction that you were in danger is merely an assumption, as is Legan's decision that it was merely a meteorological vessel." Selden said stubbornly, "I can't believe that it was an entirely innocent event." Hammond went on, "If that ship was looking for you, those on board must have known you'd be there. How would they know, if not from Legan?" "I believe Legan knew nothing," said Dors. Selden suspected Lisang Randa, but Dors insisted the man was anti-imperialist to the core. Hammond asked which sectors Legan had mentioned as likely sources for a meteorological vessel. Dors recalled them: Hestalonia, Y, Ziggurat, and North Damiano. "We can only speculate," said Hammond. "What I'm thinking is, why?" "Why?" echoed Selden. "From my knowledge of psychohistory, of course." No, said Hammond. Y, W-Y-E. It's a sector on Trantor ruled by one line of mayors for some 3,000 years. 500 years ago, 2 emperors and an empress of the House of Y sat on the imperial throne. It was a comparatively short period and not particularly distinguished, but the mayors of Y have never forgotten this imperial past. The present mayor is old now, but he's capable, and his ambition hasn't cooled. If anything happens to Cleon, even a natural death, the mayor will have a chance at the succession to the imperial throne over Cleon's own young son. Therefore, if the mayor of Y has heard of you, you might serve as a useful scientific prophet on behalf of his house. He could try to arrange some convenient end for Cleon, and use you to predict the inevitable succession of Y and the coming of peace and prosperity for 1,000 years after. Of course, once he was on the throne and had no further use for you, you might well follow Cleon to the grave. Selden broke the grim silence that followed by saying, "But we don't know that it is this mayor of Y who's after me." Hammond agreed. "Perhaps no one is after you. Still, as the news concerning psychohistory and its potential spreads, more and more of the powerful will want to make use of your services." He thought a while. "Perhaps for a professor, a university is all too likely a hiding place. I think you should be moved to another and better spot as soon as possible. But I don't know where. This must be reasoned out, somehow." The three remained huddled in Selden's quarters till past lunch. Hammond maintained an almost complete silence. Finally, Selden said, "Perhaps it might be best to choose that candidate for my supposed abilities who is most nearly benign, hand me over, and count on him to defend me against the rest." Hammond looked up. "That is not necessary. I know the candidate who is most nearly benign, and he already has you." Selden smiled. "Do you place yourself on the same level as the mayor of Y and the emperor of the galaxy?" "In point of position, no," said Hammond. "But as far as the desire to control you is concerned, I rival them. They, however, want you in order to strengthen their own wealth and power, while I have no ambitions at all except for the good of the galaxy. I ask only that you perfect your psychohistory so that mathematically valid predictions can be made. Therefore, I might as well ask, how are you coming along with that task?" Selden was uncertain whether to laugh or rage. Progress in less than 2 months. Hammond rose to his feet. I'm not talking about anything as final as a solution. All I'm asking is whether there now seems any hope that it can be made practical." Selden admitted that an idea had been buzzing in his head. It would take 1 billion years to understand galactic history, but reading history in the library has reminded me that galactic society was less complicated in the past. 12,000 years ago, the galaxy contained only about 10 million worlds. Still deeper in the past, who knows? Perhaps even a single world, as in the legend you yourself once mentioned, Hammond. I think I might be able to work out psychohistory if I dealt with a much simpler galactic society. "But Harry," said Doris, "finding the full records you've said you need is not practical. Memory banks could be destroyed or defaced as a result of conflict, or could simply deteriorate with time. The further back you go, the smaller the society, the less there is preserved." Selden groaned. "Well, so much for my idea." "To be sure, there is the Mysogen sector," said Doris, musing. Hammond looked up quickly. That would be the perfect place to put Selden. I should have thought of it myself. "What and where is the Mysogen sector?" asked Selden. "Harry, please, I'll tell you later," said Hammond. "Right now I have preparations to make. You leave tonight." Later that night, neither Harry nor Doris could sleep, and Selden found that he had to talk. "I've been so much trouble to you, Doris. Still, I'm sorry I'll have to leave you." "You won't be leaving me," said Doris. "I'm coming with you. Hammond is arranging a leave of absence for me. Now, Harry, please go to bed." "I'm sorry again, Doris, but I can't sleep. Let me at least change the subject. You haven't explained what the Mysogen sector is. Why will it be good for me to go there? What's it like?" "It is a small sector," said Doris, "with a population of about 2 million. The Mysogenians cling tightly to a set of traditions about early history, and are supposed to have very ancient records not available to anyone else. And now, please, do go to sleep." Harry Selden and Doris Venable left the university grounds at 0300 wearing hooded cloaks for disguise. Hammond did not accompany them. "I must limit my absence from work," he had told them, "if I'm not to become a target myself." They took an expressway car to an obscure port where a private airjet was waiting. Standing next to it was a small man, dressed in the usual glaring Trantorian colors. Doris said, "We're Psycho." "And I'm History," answered the pilot. They followed him into the airjet. "Whose idea was the passwords?" asked Selden. "Hammond's," said Doris. Selden snorted. Somehow I didn't think Hammond would have a sense of humor. Doris smiled. In less than 10 minutes, the jet was spewed out into the atmosphere, headlong into the sudden, pervasive darkness of night. Selden peered out the window at the stars throughout the flight. When they sank again beneath the clouds, upper side was immediately below them, and its surface, at least at this spot, was a rolling mixture of dark, wooded grottos and grasslands, as Glaucia had described. The jet port where they landed seemed deserted. There was nothing to do but wait. "Hammond told me we would be met by Sunmaster 14, said Doris. "I guess that's a human being, but I'm not sure if it's a man or a woman." "An odd name," said Harry, and a voice said, "That is my name, tribesman." Selden, startled, looked to his left. An open ground car had somehow drawn close. It was boxy and archaic, almost like a delivery wagon. In it, at the controls, was a tall, old man who looked vigorous despite his age. With stately majesty, he got out of the vehicle. He wore a long white gown with voluminous sleeves pinched in at the wrists. His head, beautifully shaped, was completely hairless. He regarded the two calmly with his deep blue eyes. Tribesman Cheddar Hammond informed the brethren that there would be members from 2 of the tribes arriving. He asked that you be cared for. You will be safe here. Doris bent her head. "We are grateful, Sunmaster 14. Sunmaster turned to her with an air of dispassionate contempt. "In Mysogen, women speak only after they are spoken to," he said. "As a guest, you will not be bound by the rules. Yet, in one respect, you must conform." And he pointed with infinite scorn, first to Selden's head, and then to Doris. "Your hair must not be seen. I have brought skin caps that will mold themselves to your skulls, together with strips that will hide your super-optical patches, the eyebrows. You will wear them while with us, and, of course, Tribesman Selden will shave daily." "Why must we do this?" asked Harry. "Because to us," said Sunmaster, "hair on the head is obscene. All Mysogynians are depilated at puberty. Through depilation, Mysogynians always remember who they are and that all others are but tribesmen." He handed over the caps and showed Harry and Doris how to put them on. "Now," said the old Mysogynian, "if you will enter my ground car, I will take you into Mysogen." Sunmaster drove along methodically. There were other wagon-like vehicles along the way, all driven by hairless men, their bald pates gleaming in the light. On either side were three-story structures, all lines meeting at right angles, everything gray in color. "We seem to be passing through a residential area," noted Selden. "There are no signs of business or industry," Sunmaster interrupted him. "We are a farming community entirely. Where are you from that you do not know this?" Selden explained that he was an outworlder and had been on Trantor for only 2 months. "But if you are a farming community," he asked, "how is it that we have passed no farms?" Sunmaster said that the farms were on lower levels. He further explained that all Mysogynians lived in equivalent quarters. The brothers all wore white gowns, the sisters gray. Harry and Doris would be required to dress accordingly, and would live in guest quarters that were like that of the Mysogynians. Selden began to ask more about the nature of the society, but was swiftly interrupted. "I am not compelled to answer your question, Tribesman Selden. We have promised Tribesman Hammond to keep you secure as long as you do not violate our way of life. Curiosity is permitted, but it wears our patience quickly." But it was not security that Selden sought, at least not security alone. He needed information, too, and without that he could not and would not stay here. Harry and Doris looked with some distress at their quarters. There were 2 narrow beds and everything that was necessary for 2 people who were willing to live under cramped conditions. Harry sighed and reviewed the situation. Most things here were none of their business, but, he said to Doris, most things are my business. That's why I've come here. I want to know some of the things they know. Or think they know, said Doris. I understand that they have legends that are supposed to date back to primordial times, but I can't believe that they can be taken seriously. To my knowledge, there are no outside records of the legends. These people are almost psychotic in their inward clinging. That Hammond can break down their barriers somewhat and get them to even take us in is remarkable, really remarkable. Selden brooded. There has to be an opening somewhere. Sunmaster was surprised, angry in fact, that I didn't know Mysogen was an agricultural community. That seems to be something they don't want kept a secret. The point is, it isn't a secret, said Doris. They culture all varieties of microfood, yeast, of course, along with algae, bacteria, multicellular fungi, and so on. But they use secret fertilizing formulas, secret environmental influences. Ingrown, muttered Selden. With a vengeance, said Doris. The imperial government protects Mysogen because without them the upper classes wouldn't have these unique microfoods that add the subtlest flavors, the tangiest spices to every dish. Mysogen depends on the sales to maintain its odd way of life. Doris looked about. They do live austerely. There's no holovision, I notice, and no book films. Maybe they think this is all they need, said Harry, reaching toward the end table between the 2 beds and picking up an object. It turned out to be a speaker. When he had figured out how to use it, he made contact with a Mysogenian who arranged to have someone show them how to use the kitchen, and anything else they might need to know. But he couldn't say when. Let's get some sleep, Harry said to Doris. When the new day starts, I'm going to ask for a tour of the Mysogenian microfood plantations. If that's the one thing they're proud of, I might get them to talk about their legends, too. Personally, I think that's a clever strategy. I doubt the Mysogenians will be so easily trapped, said Doris. We'll see, said Selden. I mean to get those legends. The next morning found Harry using the calling device again. He was angry because, for one thing, he was hungry. It was 2 hours before someone actually arrived. The newcomer was a young man whose bald pate was slightly freckled, and who probably would have been a redhead otherwise. He was bearing several pots. "I am Grey Cloud 5. I have brought a meal for you, from my own kitchen, where my woman prepared it." Harry asked for instruction in how to use the kitchen and prepare food. "The best I can do," said Grey Cloud, "is to have 2 sisters sent in. I ask your pardon for inconveniencing you with feminine presence, but it is they who know these things." After Grey Cloud left, Harry said, "Surely if we treat the sisters as human beings, they will be grateful enough to speak of their legends." "If they know them," said Dors. "Somehow I have no faith that the Mysogynians bother to educate their women very well." The sisters arrived some 6 hours later. They entered the apartment shyly, almost on tiptoe. They wore gray gowns, and of course their heads were bald and their faces were devoid of any ornamentation. "I'm Raindrop 43, tittered one, "and this is my younger sister, Raindrop 45. We're very strong on raindrops in our cohort." "How about just 43 and 45, ladies?" said Selden. They both stole a quick glance at him, but neither said a word. Dors spoke. "The thing is that we don't know how to use the kitchen." "We'll make you a good, nourishing lunch," said Raindrop 43 to Dors. They disappeared into the kitchen. Selden stared after them and tried to work out the strategy he intended to use. "That was good," said Selden after the meal. "Considerably better than the food Grey Cloud brought." He leaned back with a satisfied feeling and said, "You've been on Trantor for 2 years, Dors, so you might understand things I don't. Is it your opinion that this odd social system the Mysogynians have is part of a supernaturalistic view?" Dors said, "If you're asking if Mysogen is a religious community," she explained that the archaic term religious meant supernaturalistic. "From what I've seen, I wouldn't be surprised if the Mysogynian society is religious in character." "In that case," said Harry, "would it surprise you if Mysogynian legends were also religious in character?" "That wouldn't necessarily follow," said Dors. "The core of the legends might still be authentically historic. But in Mysogen, where the women seem to be treated as subhuman, would I be right in assuming that they would be more religious than the men, more involved in the legends that the society has been preserving? I wouldn't risk my life on it, Harry, but I'd be willing to risk a week's income. There's a bit of your psychohistory. Rule 47,854. The downtrodden are more religious than the satisfied." Selden shook his head. "Don't joke about psychohistory, Dors. Hammond insists the Empire will collapse, that psychohistory is the only hope for saving it, and that without it humanity will be destroyed, or go through prolonged misery. He seems to place the responsibility for preventing that on me. I must convince myself, and even convince Hammond, that psychohistory, despite theory, cannot be developed. So I must follow up as many leads as I can to show that each one must fail. Leads like going back in history to a time when human society was smaller than it is now. I will have to think of a way to persuade some Mysogynians to talk. Those sisters, for instance." "Well, let me think," said Dors. "Seems to me that on many occasions a religion has a book or books of significance, books that give their ritual, their view of history, their sacred poetry, and who knows what else." Harry asked, "Do you think the Mysogen has books of that sort?" "To be truthful," said Dors, "I've never heard of any, which means they either don't exist or are kept secret." "At least it's a starting point," said Selden grimly. The sisters returned about 2 hours after Harry and Dors had finished lunch. Raindrop 43, the graver sister, held up a gray gown for Dors' inspection, and then handed a white gown to her. Dors turned to Selden. "From the color, I should say this one is yours." "Presumably," said Selden, "but give it back." "She did not give it to me." "Oh, Harry," mouthed Dors, shaking her head slightly. But Selden was firm. Dors hesitated, then made a half-hearted attempt to pass the gown back to Raindrop 43. The sister put her hand behind her back and moved away, all life seeming to drain from her face. Dors asked her, Have you ever met a tribesman before, sister, or a tribeswoman? A long hesitation, and then a slow, negative shake of the head. I am not merely a tribesman, said Harry. I am an honored guest in Mysogen. I will not be treated as though I do not exist. I will be in communication with Sunmaster 14, and I will complain bitterly. Raindrop 45 began to sob, and Raindrop 43, retaining her impassivity, flushed faintly. Finally, she spoke. You must not complain of us, tribesmen. You force me to break the custom of our people. What do you want of me? Selden smiled disarmingly at once and held out his hand. The garment you brought me, he said. Silently, eyes cast downward, she stretched out her arm and deposited the gown in his hand. He stepped into the bathroom and put it on. When he emerged, he found Dors in her gown, too. Looking at Harry, Dors said, You look quite Mysogenian. Now the two of us are fit to be taken out to the stores by the sisters. Yes, said Selden, but afterward I want Raindrop 43 to take me on a tour of the micro-farms. Raindrop 43's eyes widened, and she took a step backward. I should think you'd be proud to show them, said Harry. We are proud, she said, finally facing Selden. And I will show you, but I don't think you will learn any of our secrets if that is what you are after. I will take you tomorrow morning. It will take time to arrange a tour. I'll wait, said Selden. But do you promise? I am a sister, said Raindrop 43, and I will keep my word, even to a tribesman. At the last words, her eyes widened and seemed to glitter. Selden wondered what was passing through her mind, and felt uneasy. Dors insisted upon coming with Harry, fearful that something would happen to him in her absence, as it had Upperside. But Harry said, No. Much as I've grown fond of you, Dors, you cannot come ahead of my wishes on this. A half-hour later, Raindrop 43 and Harry Selden were descending level upon level. After Harry had lost track of the number of levels they had descended, they stepped out into a narrow corridor. On each side were large, thick glass tanks, in which roiled cloudy green water, full of swirling, growing algae. I presume, said Selden, that everything is automated. I don't see many brothers and sisters around. She shrugged. The details are not for you. Don't waste your time asking about it. Wait, said Harry. Don't be angry with me. I don't expect to be told state secrets. Come on, dear. The words slipped out. He took her arm, as she seemed on the point of hurrying away. She remained in place, but he felt her shudder slightly, and he released her in embarrassment. As they moved along, Selden noted how clean everything was. The glass sparkled. The tiled floor seemed moist, though it wasn't. He walked with Raindrop 43, endlessly it seemed, and every once in a while she guided him by the elbow, and it seemed to him that she had grown accustomed to that, for she did not withdraw her hand hastily. Here, come here, she said. They were standing before a small tray filled with little spheres. A brother who was tending the area looked up in mild inquiry. Raindrop 43 said to Selden, They're raw dainties. Ask for a few. Selden realized she could not speak to a brother until spoken to, and so did her bidding. Have a handful, said the brother. They helped themselves and moved away. Raindrop 43 put a dainty in her mouth and said, I never have enough. They never taste quite the same twice, and they have practically no calories. She was right. Each taste was undefinable, and not quite like the one before. The only trouble is, said the sister, that every once in a while you have a very unusual one, and you never forget it. But you never have it again, either. But it's a good thing. It teaches you the evanescence of things in the world. It was a signal, Selden thought. She had grown used to him. She was speaking quite freely, and seemed to have no more inhibitions concerning his masculinity. So this tour had served its purpose. As they walked on, she talked about the difficulty of controlling the farm's environment, and about the problems of new viruses and undesirable mutations. The reality is, she said, that even the most careful forethought and the most cleverly designed computer programs can't always predict what is essentially unpredictable. Selden felt an involuntary shudder go through him. It was as though she was speaking of psychohistory. But she was speaking only of the microfarm produce, of a tiny fraction of humanity. Unavoidably disheartened, he said, "Surely it's not all unpredictable. There are forces that guide and care for us all." The sister stiffened. She turned around toward him, studying him with penetrating eyes. Selden felt uneasy. "It seems to me that we're talking about natural phenomena," he said, "which leaves out that which is not subject to natural law. You must appeal to some great essence, some great spirit. I don't know what to call it." "I thought so," said Raindrop 43. "You're accusing us of having religion." Selden felt trapped. He raised a hand defensively and said, "It's just that from the rigidity of your customs, I thought—" The sister interrupted him. "Don't think it, tribesman. If our customs are rigid, it is because we are mere millions surrounded by billions. Somehow we must mark ourselves off so that we, precious few, are not lost among your swarms and hordes. We must be marked off by our hairlessness, our clothing, our way of life. You insult us by asking about our religion. Religion. We have no need of it." Selden's spirits reached bottom. This whole expedition with Raindrop 43 had come to nothing. Then she said, "We have something far better. We have history." And Selden's feelings rebounded at once, and he smiled. Raindrop 43 stared at Selden, wild-eyed and breathing heavily. "I can't stay here," she said. Walking rapidly, she led Harry to a row of little sheds for resting. The one at the end was unoccupied. Raindrop 43 looked about rapidly, motioned Selden in, then stepped inside herself. She closed the door, and as she did so, a small ceiling light brightened the interior. The room was not large, but it had a chair and a cot with what were obviously clean sheets. She sat down on the chair, stiffly upright, visibly attempting to force herself into relaxation. "If it is ever known that I have been here with a man, even if only a tribesman, I shall be an outcast." Selden spoke quickly. "Then let's not stay here." "Sit down," said the sister. "I can't go out while I'm in this state of mind. You asked about religion. What are you after?" "I told you," he said, "I'm a scholar. It is my profession to know, so I want to learn history. For many worlds, the ancient historical records have decayed into myths and legends, often becoming part of a set of religious beliefs. You say that Mysogen does not have religion, but has history. How old?" She answered, 20,000 years. It is real history, not something that has degenerated into legend. "How does this history begin?" he asked. There was a faraway look in the sister's eyes. "It begins with a world, our world. One world." "One world," said Selden. He thought of Haman, speaking about legends of a single, original world of humanity. "One world," she repeated. "There were others later, but ours was the first. One world with space, with open air, with fertile fields, friendly homes, warm people. For thousands of years we lived there, and then we had to leave and skulk from place to place, until some of us found a corner in Trantor where we learned to grow the food that has brought us a little freedom. In Mysogen we have our own ways, and our own dreams." "And your histories?" asked Selden. "They give the full details concerning the original world, the one world?" "Oh yes," said Raindrop 43. "It is all in a book we always carry so that we can read it and remember who we are and who we were, and resolve that someday we will have our world back." "Where is this world? Who lives on it now?" Selden asked. Raindrop 43 shook her head fiercely. "We do not know, but someday we will find it." "May I see the book?" Selden asked cautiously. Now a slow smile crossed the face of the sister. "On one condition," her tongue emerged slightly and licked quickly at her lips, "that you remove your skin cap." Harry stared blankly at her. There was a perceptible moment when he did not know what she was talking about. She was looking at him hungrily. The sister rose quickly and sat down next to him on the cot. Slowly, carefully, she detached the skin cap in front of his ear. Again she licked her lips, and she was panting as she loosened it and turned it up. Then it came away and was gone, and Selden's hair, released, seemed to stir a bit in glad freedom. Her fingers slowly touched his hair, then withdrew. "That's nice," she said. May I do it again? If you will let me have the book long enough to study it, then, perhaps." Raindrop 43 reached into her gown and from some hidden pocket removed a book bound in a tough, flexible material. He took it, trying to control his excitement, while Selden readjusted his skin cap to cover his hair. Raindrop 43 raised her hands to her nose and then, gently and quickly, licked one finger. "Felt your hair," said Doris Venopoli. She looked at Selden's hair as though she was of a mind to feel it herself. Selden moved away slightly. "Please don't." The woman made it seem like a perversion. "Poor Harry," said Doris. "It was all perfectly natural. Anything forbidden gains sexual attractiveness. Listen, let me tell you something that happened to me. I was at a lake resort back home on Cinna. On our beaches, we're pretty light-hearted about what we wear, or don't wear." Selden said, "We have somewhat higher standards of decency on Helicon." Doris went on. "In any case, I was sitting at the beach by the lake, and a young man to whom I had spoken earlier approached me. He was a decent fellow. He sat on the arm of my chair, and in order to steady himself, he placed his right hand on my left thigh, which was bare, of course. After we had spoken for a minute, he said, impishly, 'Here I am, you know me hardly at all, and yet it seems perfectly natural to me that I place my hand on your thigh. What's more, it seems perfectly natural to you, since you don't seem to mind that it remains there.' It was only then that I actually noticed that his hand was on my thigh. Bare skin in public somehow loses some of its sexual quality. As I said, it's the hiding from view that is crucial. And the young man felt this way too, for he went on to say, 'Yet if you were wearing a gown, you wouldn't dream of letting me lift your gown and place my hand on your thigh, on the precise spot it now occupies.' That night at dinner, I approached the young man and said, 'Here I am in a gown, but under it my left thigh is bare. I give you permission. Just lift the gown and place your hand on my left thigh where you had it earlier.' He tried, but everyone was staring. I wouldn't have stopped him, and I'm sure no one else would have. It was no more public than it had been earlier, and the same people were present. It was clear that I had taken the initiative and had no objections. But he could not bring himself to violate the proprieties. The conditions which had been hand on thigh in the afternoon were not hand on thigh in the evening, and that meant more than anything logic could say. "I would have put my hand on your thigh," Selden said playfully. "Then what you're saying, Harry, is that Helicon is more respectable at the informal level than Cinna is, as at the beach, and less respectable at the formal level. Isn't that right?" She went on, talking about the social and sexual customs of other cultures. "Here in Mysogen, for instance, I have the impression that sex is strictly controlled. I don't suppose there are any two sectors in Trantor, or any two worlds outside of Trantor, in which attitudes towards sex are completely duplicated." Harry spoke thoughtfully. "You know what I think? It would appear that—" But Doris interrupted. "Anyway, one thing is clear. I'm simply not going to let you out of my sight any more. Twice I let you go. Both times it was a mistake. Suppose you'd been caught indulging in sexual escapades with a sister." "Look," said Selden, "my object was to find out about Mysogenian history, and as a result of a so-called sexual escapade with the sister, I have the book." He produced the archaic printed volume. As Doris looked thoughtfully through it, Harry said, "I will read this, and it may push me in the direction of psychohistory." Thoughts of the book replaced his musings about the hand-on-thigh story. But later that night, Harry looked up from his reading and told Doris that the book seemed to be of little use for his purposes. "It deals with internal politics rather than history or legend." "Perhaps you underestimate its age," said Doris. "The period it deals with may be a time when there was indeed one inhabited world. Human beings are a single species spread all over the galaxy, so they must have originated somewhere." Selden thought about that a moment, then dismissed the idea with a shrug. "Well, I'll leave it to the biologists." Doris smiled. "They're precisely the ones who are keenest on the Earth hypothesis." "Earth," said Selden. Is that what they call the supposed world of origin? That's a popular name for it, though there's no way of telling what it was called, assuming there was such a world. And no one has any clue to what its location might be. Earth, said Selden, curling his lips. It sounds like a belch to me. In any case, if the book deals with the original world, I didn't come across that name. Did they give a name to their own world, this world that seems to preoccupy them entirely? As you'd expect, said Selden, they call it the world, or the world of the dawn. At one point, come to think of it, they referred to it as Aurora. Aurora. Dors thought about it. I can't say I've ever heard of a planet with that name. But then, I can't know the name of every one of the 25 million worlds. The next morning, refreshed and eager to resume his study of the book, Harry asked Dors, "In your work, have you ever come across objects or phenomena called robots?" "Ah," said Dors, "now you're switching to another legend, and a very popular one. There are any number of worlds that imagine the existence of machines in human form in prehistoric times. These are called robots. The tales of robots probably originate from one master legend, for the general theme is the same. Simple robots were devised, but then they grew to the status of almost superhuman. They threatened humanity and were destroyed. In every case, destruction took place before the reliable historic records available to us today existed. But why do you ask about robots?" "Because," said Harry, "in this ancient Mycenaean book they talk of robots, and very favorably, by the way. Listen, Dors. When you go out with Raindrop 45 this afternoon, I would like you to find out, as tactfully as possible, if there is some structure in Mycenae that is tied in with the past that has a sort of mythic value." Dors interrupted, trying not to smile. "I think what you're trying to ask is whether Mycenae has a temple." And inevitably, Selden looked blank and asked, "What's a temple?" "Another archaic term, Harry. It means a place with the things you asked about. Significance, past, myth. Very well, I'll ask the sister. It's the sort of thing, however, they might find difficult to speak of, especially to tribespeople." Dors returned in time for dinner, and found Selden on his cot, still leafing through the book, but with intensified impatience. Removing her eyebrow patches, she said, "The temple exists. I have directions. But Raindrop 45 warned me that women are not allowed inside except on special occasions. It's called the Sacratorium. It's a place that's devoted to another world, a former and better one." "Aurora," said Harry. "I may be able to find support for the book's concept of Aurora in the Sacratorium. And I'm also terribly caught up with what the book has to say about robots." "Surely you don't take that seriously." "If you accept some passages of the book literally," said Harry, "then I find 4 things that I can deduce about robots. First, they exactly resembled human beings. Second, they had very extended lifespans, if you want to call it that. Third, some, or at least one, continues to live on to this day." "Really, Harry," said Dors, "that's one of the most widespread legends we have, the ancient hero who does not die." "Fourth," said Selden, not rising to the bait, "there are some lines in the book that seem to indicate that the central temple, or Sacratorium, contains a robot. If we combine the 4 points, then perhaps a robot that looks exactly like a human being and that is still alive, having been alive for, say, the last 20,000 years, is in the Sacratorium. It's only one chance out of a million, I admit, but what if it's true? Don't you see how useful he could be to me? He could remember the galaxy as it was long before any reliable historical records existed. He might make psychohistory possible." "Even if it were true," said Dors, "do you suppose that the Mycenaeans would let you see and interview the robot?" "I don't intend to ask permission," said Harry. "I can at least go to the Sacratorium and see if there's something to interview first." "Well," said Dors, "if you don't think better of it by morning, then we go." In the morning, Harry Harry and Doris set out for the sacratorium. The public conveyance they boarded was an outmoded version of what Selden back on Helicon would have called a gravy-bus. Doris nudged Harry. "We're being watched. The man on your right." Selden shifted his eyes briefly. The man Doris had indicated was rather thin and seemed quite old, with dark brown eyes and a swarthy complexion. Then there was a light touch on the right sleeve of his gown. Selden turned hesitantly and found himself looking at a card on which was written faintly, "Careful, tribesman." Selden started and automatically put a hand to his skin cap. The man silently mouthed the word, "hair." Selden's hand found it, a tiny exposure of bristles at his temple. He must have disturbed the skin cap at some point or another. Quickly, he tugged the skin cap, then made sure it was snug. "Thank you," he whispered. His neighbor smiled and said in a normal voice, "Going to the sacratorium?" Selden said yes, that he was traveling with his woman, and the Mysogynian suggested they get off together. Selden was not sure how to react, but felt a soft pat on his knee from Doris, which he took to mean, "It's all right." The gravy-bus made a wide turn about the perimeter of the sacratorium grounds, and there was a general exodus when it came to a halt, the men sliding in front of the women to exit first.